These children are deaf, or almost deaf. About a third of them were born deaf, and the others lost their hearing when they were very young. When they first come to this school, they cannot speak, and it is known as a boarding school for deaf mutes. There are in China quite a number of such schools, all run by the Army Medical Corps. In 1968, during the Cultural Revolution, the Army medical people discovered that acupuncture appeared to be able to restore, at least partially, the hearing of deaf children. As the children begin to hear, they must also be taught how to speak. And they first must learn to recognize differences in pitch. The Chinese language is based on the recognition of different tones. The children in this class have been here only a few months. Most of them will stay for 3 years. The phrase that this teacher is asking them to repeat means, when we grow up, we will be a worker, farmer, or soldier. The Army Medical Unit give acupuncture treatment to the children several times a week. The doctors told me that over 80% of the students recover at least some of their hearing. Success or otherwise is dependent on the cause of deafness, the extent of the impairment, and, as important as anything, the attitude and degree of cooperation of the individual child. At regular intervals, the children's hearing is tested. Teaching children who have been deaf and who have only begun to regain their hearing presents many difficulties, and the children often cannot hear the mistakes in speech they make. By holding a feather in front of their mouth, they have a visible means of showing themselves whether they are breathing outwards correctly while forming certain words. This teacher is telling the children about the growing of corn. The word for corn in Chinese is daozi, and each child in turn gets up and attempts to pronounce this word correctly. These children have been here for over 2 years. Their speech is not yet correct, but they're beginning to express themselves with more confidence. Every now and again, students who have been through the school return to share their experiences with each other. This girl, after giving her name, tells the others the kind of work she is doing in a factory. This young girl tells the others that she is now able to go to a normal school. None of them speaks quite normally, but they can be readily understood. Each one in turn gives his name and describes the work he is doing. This older boy is explaining that he was taught to read blueprints and is now making wooden molds at a steel factory. On one of our visits to this school, the deaf children put on a show for us. These two students, who are only 12 and 13 years old, give an extract from a dance drama which has been very popular in China for a number of years. It's called The White-Haired Girl. This is a scene where a poor old peasant father gives a little ribbon to his daughter. This girl is one of the students. She is saying, "Students of the deaf school, welcome you." The teacher is saying, "The deaf children here warmly welcome you." In the new China, the flowers bloom the thoughts of Chairman Mao. Dumb people can now speak, and we have friends all over the world, and we welcome them to our country. She says that the song that the children are about to sing is entitled, "The Iron Tree Will Blossom and the Dumb Will Speak," which is an old Chinese metaphor meaning that the impossible has been accomplished. Though the Chinese are convinced that acupuncture, if given over a period of years, is able to restore hearing in young people, I must emphasize that this treatment is still experimental. It may be some years before this therapy can be properly assessed and applied outside of China. I recently went to China for my 6th visit, this time with my family. And for 5 months, we traveled widely throughout the country. We found that what is going on in China since the Cultural Revolution is so experimental, so different to what is going on anywhere else in the world, that the only way it could be conveyed was by making a series of films, each one on a different aspect of Chinese life. This film is about the life of the peasants. For centuries, every year, somewhere in China, thousands used to die of starvation. In bad years, millions. Today, no one in China goes to bed wondering where tomorrow's food is coming from. How was this done? It wasn't done without mistakes and some years of near disaster. But the great breakthrough came in 1958 with the setting up of the People's Communes. To understand what a commune is, let's start with a single village. Each village is responsible for its own budget, it organizes its own work, elects its own leaders, and is known as a production team. Let this symbolize a single village with its surrounding fields. But a single village can't afford to buy a tractor or set up a high school or do any large-scale irrigation work. So a number of villages or production teams are associated together in what is known as a production brigade. But what about larger projects, like rural factories, a modern hospital, or the damming of a large river? Even a group of 20 or 30 villages couldn't handle this kind of work. So a number of brigades joined together to form an even larger unit. And it is this association of brigades that forms a single commune. It was a brilliant innovation, for on the human side, it enabled the peasants in a village to run their own affairs and work alongside those that they are familiar with. And at the same time, it made possible the large-scale work that was essential if enough food was to be grown for nearly 800 million people. China is huge. There are over 70,000 communes such as I've described. We shall see only 3 of them. One in the southern province of Guangdong, and one further to the southwest in Yunnan province. But first, let's see a commune village in Shanxi province, 1,500 miles to the north. This area in Shenyang County in northern China has rainfall for only about 2 months a year. And when the rain does come in July and August, it comes in disastrous torrents. The result is that the hills around here are very deeply eroded. And until recent years, for agriculture, they were virtually useless. The peasants who lived here were abjectly poor. And most of them lived in hovels or in caves, and perhaps you can see some of the caves that they used to live in behind me. Today, they're using these caves for the keeping of pigs. Only 83 families live in this small town of Tachai. But it has become famous throughout China, not only for what the people here have accomplished materially, but for their extraordinary spirit of self-reliance and their cooperation. A well-stocked village store such as this would have been unthinkable a few years ago. Since the establishment of the communes, and especially since the Cultural Revolution, the whole quality of rural life has undergone a transformation. Most families now have 2 rooms, a bedroom and a kitchen living room. Food is now plentiful in Tachai, as it is everywhere in China today. Vegetable soup made with noodles is the main dish for breakfast. The father has already worked for 2 hours at the corn husking yard, and his wife will go out to work there too, after the older children have left for school. The grandmother will remain at home to look after the younger child, and during the day she will buy the family groceries. As with most families in China, this is a 3-generation family. During the morning, school children and their teachers help to clear the streets. The snow is taken and scattered on the fields, so when in the spring the warm weather begins and the snow slowly melts, it will help to irrigate the early crops. In winter, when work in the fields is impossible, the villagers husk the corn they harvested in the autumn. The work starts early. To fill eroded gullies and enlarge the areas on which they can grow food, the peasants are ready to pull down whole mountains. Here at Tachai, they have built hundreds of terraces to retain the soil. The bulldozer has come from the brigade tractor station. The greater part of the work is done by hand. When decisions need to be taken about the work, the peasants gather for what they call an on-the-spot meeting. The leading spirit of this brigade is Chen Yong-Kui. Before the revolution, some of his family died of starvation. Chen himself was illiterate until a few years ago. Today, he is a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, but goes on working among his own people. The main work during the winter months is building the walls that will form the new terraces and hold the soil pulled down from the mountain sides. Many acres of new arable land have been formed in this way. The stone for the walls comes from high up in the mountains. China's great agricultural achievements were only made possible by the readiness of the peasants to undergo immensely hard physical work. Kunming Lake in the far southwest. China is a land of extraordinary natural beauty. Larger in area than the United States, the country embraces immense ranges of climate. Here too, they are moving a whole mountain to make new fields. We are now in Kwantung province, approaching Quangli, the main town of the Quangli People's Commune. The Quangli Commune covers 96 square miles, and its 42,000 members live in 207 scattered villages. There was nothing special about this commune. I saw communes that were more advanced and some which were much poorer. The commune is administered by this revolutionary committee. We were the first foreign guests to visit this commune. We found the committee members very down-to-earth, practical, amiable people. The basic policies of the commune are set by the area Communist Party, but are administered by this committee. Their responsibilities are extensive. They administer the commune schools, the hospitals, road construction, as well as the commune industries and any large-scale irrigation and flood control projects. Some of the committee are elected by the commune members. Some are appointed by the party. Usually, about a third of the members of these commune committees are women. In spite of their heavy administrative work, every member of the committee works for several months a year in the fields. A man-made lake. Everywhere in China, one sees dams that have been built since the revolution. There must be tens of thousands of them. This one, built in 1959 with 2 other communes cooperating, radically improved the economy of this whole area. One man said to us, before we built the dam, our fields in the rainy season were waterlogged. In the dry season, our land was parched. Thanks to the dam, many villages in this commune can now breed fish, an important item of diet in China. The dam also allowed a small power station to be built. Almost every village in the commune now has locally produced electricity. The availability of electric power has made possible one of the most significant developments in China, the expansion of rural industry. We found quite small workshops and factories making electronic components, tools for export, and even tractors. This development of self-reliant rural communities has become a keystone of national economic policy. During our own industrial revolution, rural populations flocked into the cities. China is planning her industry in quite a different way. Industry is moving into the countryside, bringing millions of her peasant population into industrial production. In this way, the Chinese hope that the great social and cultural differences between life in the cities and life in the country will gradually diminish. This dispersal of industry also has strategic advantages. Half of China could be overrun, and the other half could still function effectively. Incredible though it sounds, I found no inflation in China. Most things cost precisely the same, or even less than they did 15 years ago, when I first began to take notes of the cost of various items. Wages, on the other hand, have gone up. The Commune Bank. The bank does a brisk business. Though the average family only earns about $250 a year in actual cash, 3/4 of the people in the commune are able to save. For expenses are low too. There are no personal taxes, their share of the rice distribution is free, they pay no rent, and clothing costs little. Education is also free. Kindergartens are run by the brigade for children in families where the parents are working and where there are no older relatives to look after them. There are 107 kindergartens in this commune and 35 primary and middle schools. Before the revolution, there was almost no rural education at all. And even today in this commune, about 4% of the children, those living in very outlying parts, do not go to primary school. This commune, like all communes, has a central hospital with fully trained doctors and modern equipment, in addition to the many smaller clinics in the villages. Most commune members pay about 60 cents a year for full medical coverage. As everywhere in China, the young people in the villages here are trained in the civilian militia, usually drilling for 2 hours twice a week. One of Mao's famous sayings is, "Trust the people." And in China today, millions of people are trusted to carry arms. We spent a number of days in one of the commune's 207 villages, or production teams as they are called. This one consisted of 46 families. They set out for the day's work. After the autumn harvest is in, every villager, regardless of age, receives an equal free distribution of rice. Last year, everyone received more than a pound of rice a day. This is more than they can use, so it enables every family to build up its own reserves. An amount of grain is also allocated for the team reserve. The state guarantees to buy any rice that is then left over, and at a fixed price, so that the team need never worry about finding a market or about price fluctuations. As a side occupation and a source of extra revenue for the village, this team grows bamboo. Every work group sends one of its members to report how many hours each person worked that day. The annual cash wage is calculated according to the number of work points each member has earned. We spend some time with the Chang family. Mrs. Chang is the mother of 3 small children. While she works, her mother-in-law looks after the children and does the family shopping. Older people continue to play an important part in the family, even when they're too old to do work. The Chang family gather for their evening meal around 6 o'clock. Mrs. Chang cooks the meal if the grandmother hasn't yet prepared it. Her husband studies a book on mechanics borrowed from a traveling library that comes to the village every week. The grandfather during the day is in charge of an orchard where the team grows mandarin oranges, which are sold to the state for export. The husband drives a tractor in the rice fields. The husband's sister during the day helps on the rice drying yard. China still buys wheat from abroad, some of which goes into national reserves. But these imports of wheat also enable China to export rice, for which she obtains a higher price than she pays out for the imported wheat. She also makes a large annual rice contribution to the North Vietnamese. Some rice from this team goes off to the commune warehouse. Some goes to the much smaller team's reserves. And some goes to the grain reserve that is kept by every family. The Changs do not any longer have to worry about getting enough to eat. The peasants of China work unbelievably hard, and the rewards made to us appear small. But the starvation and abject wretchedness which has haunted China for centuries is now a thing of the past, and the basis has been laid for quite a new kind of life for China's 600 million peasants. For more than 2 years, during the Cultural Revolution, all schools and colleges in China were closed. Why did this happen? And what is going on now in education in China? On my recent visit, I was able to find some of the answers. Chinese education had become caught between two sharply opposed ideas of what kind of education was best for China. There were those who said that what a technically backward country needed was, above all, a highly trained managerial elite, professional administrators, specialists, experts. But there were others who said, yes, China does need as many intellectuals and highly trained experts as possible. But the last thing we want is any kind of an elite. In a socialist country, they said, education must serve the interests of the working people. This wasn't merely a mild academic debate. It was, in essence, a bitter class struggle, which would determine what kind of country China was going to be. In the universities especially, the conflict was violent, even physically violent. And it was this clash between two utterly opposed ideas which brought education to a halt. Eventually, the concept of a working-class, non-elitist education won out. But some fantastically difficult problems still remained. How, for instance, to uproot the age-old idea that brain work was somehow superior to handwork? And how could they get it across to students that real education has nothing to do with their getting a better job, more pay, but is a means by which society as a whole can be advanced? These are tremendous questions, and the Chinese don't for a moment claim that they have found all the answers. Schools and colleges are functioning again, but everything is still experimental. Much of what goes on in education appears rather normal. But as you will see, under the appearance of normality, some quite new educational ideas are being applied. Four-year-olds in a typical city kindergarten. By means of songs and dances, children are taught that to do manual work is something to be proud of. We are little red soldiers working in the wood workshop. Look, these are our tools. Today, a strong emphasis is placed on children learning to be self-reliant, doing as much as they can for themselves. This kindergarten is in Peking, but it could be anywhere. We saw similar schools in every city we visited. These are the same children preparing for their afternoon nap. A typical primary school. The teacher is saying, please write these words. Forward, unite, together. In this village school, as in all schools in China, children learn their arithmetic on an abacus. Every morning, all over China, school children, as well as many adults at their place of work, do their morning exercises. It was a bitterly cold December morning when I filmed this. Education since the Cultural Revolution is non-competitive. There are now far fewer examinations, and most are open book exams. It's considered more useful for a student to know where to look for information than to cram his mind full of facts for an exam. This represents an enormous change from classical Chinese education. While painting and literature are still part of the curriculum, the emphasis is now placed on subjects of immediate practical application and on the learning of foreign languages.
你又能不能运用你所学到的知识，把齿轮传动的知识用到我们实际生产中？
Since the Cultural Revolution, factory workers now teach many of the practical subjects.
他把这个线圈装到这上头来，那就是说，确实是应该装上一个线圈。下边你做实验。
我现在拿的这手柄吧是那个主动轴，这个绕线去吧，这个是被动轴。下面我绕。1、2、3、4、5、6、7、8、9、10、11、12、13、14、15、16、17、18、19、20、21、22、23、24、25、26、27、28、29、30、31、32、33、34、35、36、37、38、39、40、41、42、43、44、45、46、47、48、49、50、51、52、53、54、55、56、57、58、59、60、61、62、63、64、65、66、67、68、69、70、71、72、73、74、75、76、77、78、79、80、81、82、83、84、85、86、87、88、89、90、91、92、93、94、95、96、97、98、99、100、101、102、103、104、105、106、107、108、109、110、111、112、113、114、115、116、117、118、119、120、121、122、123、124、125、126、127、128、129、130、131、132、133、134、135、136、137、138、139、140、141、142、143、144、145、146、147、148、149、150、151、152、153、154、155、156、157、158、159、160、161、162、1
Behind me, you see a big sign. On it, the words say, "Serve the people." Now, this is a sign that you see all over China today. Big signs like this one, small signs. It's even written on small children's satchels as they go to school. And of course, one wonders at first, when one comes here, whether it is more than a slogan, whether it is just a nice phrase. But one soon discovers that it is more than a slogan. It has entered the very spirit of the people here, and that wherever one goes, one seems to see people conscious that their purpose is not to serve themselves, but to help others and to serve the people and serve the nation.
Children at school help each other by mending each other's clothes or repairing their shoes. To link theoretical and practical knowledge, workshops are set up right in the schools themselves. In this school, students are making silicon transistors for radios. Their work must meet exactly the same standard as in a factory. In ways like this, millions of teenagers in China are learning technical skills and industrial discipline before they leave school. Testing the transistors. All school children work full-time for 2 months a year at some productive work. They also have 8 weeks holiday every year. Students in the school garden. For their 2 months of practical work, school children can choose from a great variety of jobs. In Shanghai, on a ship that was being built, I came across 2 schoolgirls learning how to weld. In a jade carving factory, several school children were learning from an old master how to carve jade. Tsinghua, one of China's famous universities. Only a fraction of China's children get to college, but those who do pay no fees, and all books, food, and lodging are free. Before coming to college, every student must have worked at least 2 years in a factory or in the fields. There are no entrance examinations. A student is chosen not only because he is intellectually capable, but because his fellow workers recommend him as someone who will use his education to serve the people. The university today is administered by a revolutionary committee on which every section of the university is represented. The chairman is a Communist Party leader, and the army is represented too. One of the teaching staff. A student. The maintenance staff are represented by a janitor. In the university, as in the middle schools, wherever possible, theory is linked with practice. This computer, for example, was designed and constructed by students in the advanced electronics department. What individual freedom is there in China? As we understand freedom, very little. In the natural sciences, the intellectual is given the widest freedom to question and explore. And there is ample evidence that China is producing minds of superb competence. But the Chinese say that a competitive society like ours must of necessity develop a philosophy of individualism, while a society based on cooperation will develop quite a different ethic. Thus, in China, individuals don't follow their personal impulses, and China offers no scope for the man striving to express his personality, which we have placed so high on the list of human needs. There are, I am sure, many intellectuals in China frustrated and unhappy. But it seemed to me that most of the young students I saw and talked with were grateful for the opportunity of being at college and had accepted the idea that a man's knowledge and creativity are not, as it were, his own possessions, but are to be used for the benefit of all.
And
Professor Chen at Tsinghua during the Cultural Revolution had to work in a steel mill, and he was surprised to find this brought him quite a new kind of freedom.
I was used to write books and scientific papers after the work. Then I usually like to put my name on it.
You used to like to put your signature on your books and on your works, yes.
Actually, now I realize that's the way of seeking my personal fame and fortune.
I understand.
For the workers, they have no such kind of question. They never thought to put any signature on their products. This is indeed the striking contrast between two kinds of work outlook. And through the long period of working with the workers, I finally established the friendship with many workers. In the past, my friends all are professors and intellectuals like me. Now I have worker friends.
Another professor, specializing in biochemistry, told me that before the Cultural Revolution, he felt he had to keep up his dignity and would never have made friends with his students as he does now. And he doesn't resent it, as he said he would have done before, when his students learn about a complicated biochemical process from a worker at a factory, rather than from him in a university classroom. In these ways, the Cultural Revolution helped to break down barriers between people. All students serve in the civilian militia. In this mock battle, they were using live ammunition. Education does not end when school lets out. In every city, centers have been set up for what they call volunteer after-school education. Some learn gardening. Some embroidery. Boys making model boats. Not having many pianos, children learn on cardboard keys, and some make exceptional progress. This boy of 9 years old started only a year ago. Some children, 8 and 9 years old, prefer gymnastics. a traditional Chinese fight sequence. The children are singing about how the sun is rising in the east, how the sky is full of clouds, but that they have friends all over the world. These children, then, are the inheritors of a cultural revolution which has turned so many old educational ideas upside down. Many questions, even for the Chinese, remain unanswered. Whenever I asked whether the Cultural Revolution would indeed succeed in what it had set out to do, the building of a new society and a new kind of man, the Chinese would answer, "We don't know, for we are just at the beginning. If this Cultural Revolution does not succeed, there will be another, and if necessary, yet another, and each one will be at a deeper level." Though China, by Western standards, is still a very poor country, her mastery of modern technology and her industrial development have been far more rapid than most people ever expected. Now, if you were to ask a Chinese how this was done, the chances are that he would reply with two simple words: self-reliance. These words are a kind of shorthand covering a whole complex of ideas. They mean, for one thing, that China was determined not to become dependent on outside help. She paid off her indebtedness to the Soviet Union in 1965, and since then she's been going ahead under her own steam without any foreign aid or foreign investments. But self-reliance means much more than that. Every province, every city, every village is encouraged as far as it can to make what it needs for itself. As a result, there is now a truck factory in every one of China's provinces. Automobiles are made, I think, in 30 or more cities. Peasants in their villages build their own small hospitals. Even the army, as far as possible, grows its own food and makes its own medicines. China, in other words, has become a vast, do-it-yourself country. For a nation to be self-reliant, it must first be able to feed itself. The disastrous food shortages in 1961-62 were an indication that agriculture had been neglected, and from then on large capital funds were made available for agricultural development. China, as a result, enjoyed 10 consecutive years of good harvests. With the grain share stockpile, the country has now passed the stage of improvisation from harvest to harvest. She still imports wheat, but exports large quantities of rice to over 20 countries. And the money she receives for rice is more than the cost of imported wheat. China has, in fact, become a net exporter of food. Conservation of natural resources is another necessity if a nation is to be self-reliant. Among the first acts of the new government was the institution of a huge reforestation program. Most of the logging is done in the far north, and for each tree felled, many others are planted. This backyard electric steel furnace in a small town in Yunnan province is an example of local self-reliance. It may not be economically efficient to produce steel in such small quantities, but this kind of efficiency is not the criterion the Chinese apply. They want to avoid what has happened in other developing countries, where the concentration of all advanced technology in a few major centers has left the vast mass of the peasant population quite untouched. This building in Sumo, a small town in the south, was until recently a workshop for repairing small tractors. The engineers working here, both men and women, decided that they could make their own tractors instead of buying them from the state. The authorities encouraged them to go ahead and provided them with the necessary tools. Learn to do something by doing it is another general slogan. And these young people told me that they made all kinds of mistakes before turning out usable machines. They are now supplying tractors to several nearby communes. This story is typical of thousands of local enterprises that have sprung up throughout the rural areas of China. By including the rural population in production, China is hoping gradually to lessen the great social differences between life in the cities and the life of the peasants in the country. But if China is to be nationally self-reliant, she must also develop her heavy industries. China has 8 large steel plants, but relative to the country's needs, the national output is still far too small. China today produces all her present requirements of oil. This is one of China's medium-sized refineries. Fully automated, it was designed and built by Chinese engineers. China is the biggest producer and the biggest exporter of textiles in the world. Automobiles are made in many cities, but the total production is small. China relies on public transport and the bicycle. Her economy is not yet capable of large-scale car production, but having seen the problems that automobiles have brought to Western societies, she has, as a matter of state policy, determined never to become a car culture. How do China's industrial workers live? This is the Cheng family. The father and mother both work at a factory in Peking that makes China's version of a Jeep. They are a typical family, except for the fact that they have no older relatives still living. The boy, Cheng Paozhou, is 14. His sister, Cheng Xiaofen, is 10. The family lives in an apartment consisting of 2 rather small rooms, a simple kitchen, bathroom and toilet. Mr. and Mrs. Cheng's combined monthly income is a little over $40 a month. Their expenses are small. They pay only $2 a month rent, and this includes heating, gas, electricity and water. They pay no taxes, and all medical expenses are covered by the factory. The family leaves shortly before 7 in the morning. Mr. and Mrs. Cheng to the factory, the children to school. The children's school is just 10 minutes' walk. The factory is within easy bicycling distance. Special factory buses bring workers living farther away. This is one of 15 factories in China that makes this kind of vehicle. Like a Jeep, it has 4-wheel drive. The factory is a complete production plant, turning out engine, chassis and body. The factory works on 2 8-hour shifts. Mr. Cheng is a machinist. As part of the policy of self-reliance, workers on the assembly line are urged to use their own initiative and suggest any improvements that they think might help production. Mr. Cheng and 2 others are working out an improved design of a lathe. Mrs. Cheng works in another section of the factory. While in China, we drove hundreds of miles in this kind of vehicle, sometimes over very rough mountain roads. They're extremely sturdy in construction. They're somewhat hard on the springs. Finished vehicles being driven onto flatbed railroad cars. This factory is one of the smaller factories making this type of vehicle. It turns out around 10,000 a year. The food in the factories I visited has improved enormously since I was last in China. Workers are given a great variety of dishes to choose from. The cost of a good meal is around 12 cents, and this would include one meat dish. During vacations, the Cheng's 2 children can eat with their parents in this factory canteen. Otherwise, they have their midday meal at school. Many industrial workers live in new residential areas, such as this one not far from Shanghai. It houses 4,000 families, most of whom came from the slum areas of Shanghai when they were being cleared. It is a complete community, with shopping center, hospital, restaurant, and kindergartens and schools for the 7,000 children who live here. This housing development is administered by a committee entirely composed of women. They were elected by the residents. At this meeting, they were making plans for a Sunday outing for the residents. Among their many other duties, this committee is responsible for setting up volunteer workshops where women who want to work part-time, perhaps while their children are at school, can earn some extra money. Among the 10 or 12 workshops set up by the committee is this toy factory. The toy shops in Shanghai were calling for larger supplies, and the committee thought it was something that the women residents would enjoy doing. Making toys might at first sight seem a rather unimportant contribution to China's national economy. But taken together, there must be tens of thousands of them, their total output is not insignificant. These volunteer neighborhood workshops have not only been set up in the new housing developments, one finds them down many small streets in every city. Some of them produce quite simple things, such as this one, where women are making wooden boxes. Though there are now tens of thousands of neighborhood workshops, their importance is perhaps more social than economic. They enable housewives to take part in production and thus to feel identified with the country's overall effort. These workshops also help to bridge the gap between primitive handcraft and modern technology. I realized the full meaning of the words self-reliance when I found housewives in one neighborhood workshop actually making integrated circuits used in computers. In the West, this sophisticated work can only be seen in a few advanced laboratories. Circuits so small that they are almost invisible to the naked eye must be photographically etched onto a tiny plate, and minute hair-like wires must then be welded to appropriate points in the circuits. Nothing I saw symbolized for me more vividly what is happening in China than these middle-aged housewives taking part in advanced technology. This is China's legacy from the past, the pollution of the air over one of her old industrial cities in the northeast. In the past few years, the Chinese government has become conscious of the problem of pollution, and its policy today is to build an anti-pollution system as an integral part of any new factory. A good example is this factory producing vinyl, a synthetic fiber. "70 tons of fiber are produced here daily, and 6,000 tons of water, highly contaminated with sulfuric acid and formaldehyde, pour out of the factory every day. If untreated, the water would have eliminated all aquatic life. It would have been unusable for irrigation and would have endangered human life as well. An elaborate water purification system was therefore built simultaneously with the factory itself. The water is continuously tested, and its purity is kept well above minimum international standards. sugar refinery in Kwantung province is also doing something about pollution. Thousands of tons of sugarcane arrive at this factory every day. Refined sugar is the principal product. Dense smoke used to pour from the factory's chimney. The workers at a meeting decided to do something about it. They blocked the chimney and deflected the smoke through chambers in which the smoke particles were mixed with water, which was then evaporated. They said it was a very expensive way of dealing with the problem, and they would have to think up something better. But meanwhile, they were collecting every day between 8 and 10 tons of sludge, which formerly went into the sky as smoke. They found that the sludge, when dried and mixed with other ingredients, could form a kind of cement. Another example of recycling what was once wasteful is the use they are now making of the huge amounts of sugarcane pulp that were formerly just dumped into the sea. Now they compress the pulp, bale it, and stack it in these strange pyramid piles. As in other sugar-producing countries, the pulp is now used for a whole variety of products. Altogether, 30 different byproducts are now made from what used to be thrown away. Paper is one of them. Brewer's yeast is another byproduct. And polycrystal silicon used in electronic apparatus. Even the cinders from the coal burnt in the factory furnaces are made into something useful. They're first ground and then compressed into building blocks. Shanghai, China's largest and busiest port. Though the Chinese now trade with 107 countries, her overseas commerce represents only a very small fraction of our gross national product. I was surprised to see the great variety of things China now exports, like this frozen pork which is going to, of all countries, Denmark. China does not equate self-reliance with self-sufficiency, and she's ready to develop her foreign trade on the basis of national independence. These are Chinese-made freighters. A few years ago, China had to buy or charter all her ships from foreign countries. Now she is making an increasing number of her own, some quite large, of 10 or even 15,000 tons displacement. The foreman who took me around the shipyard told me that the average construction time of a 5,000-ton freighter was 90 days, from laying the keel to launching. This is not as fast, he said, as the Japanese. To the Chinese people, the construction of their own ships represents an important new step. They are an indication of China's growing independence and commercial strength. But even more important, they symbolize China's readiness to move outwards and take her place once more as one of the great nations of the world.